The Hall of Records was the oldest building on the Kirathai home world. Its walls were made of stone that had been cut 10,000 years ago. Its ceilings rose high into the darkness, lost in shadows that never moved. The air smelled of old paper and older memories. Elder Myra stood at the front of the hall, her silver scales catching the light from the ancient lamps. She was very old. Her eyes were cloudy. Her hands shook when she moved. But her voice was strong. It carried across the room like a bell ringing in the quiet. Before her sat a group of young Kirathai scholars. They were bright and eager, their scales still dark with youth. They had come to hear the old stories. The stories their parents had told them. The stories their grandparents had told before that. The stories that everyone knew were just stories. Myra began to speak. Long ago, she said, before the Dominion, before the great cities, before we even knew the stars, there was another species. The young scholars listened. They had heard this before. Every Kirathai child had heard it. They were called many names, Myra continued. The Unmakers, the Silent Ones, the Firstborn, but most know them as the Humans. A few of the young scholars shifted in their seats. Some smiled. These were children's tales. Fairy tales. Myths used to scare young ones into behaving. They had not come here to hear stories about monsters under the bed. They had come to learn real history. But Myra kept speaking. Her voice did not change. They were not the strongest. They were not the fastest. They were not the most intelligent. But they were the most dangerous. Because they did not fight for territory. They did not fight for resources. They fought for survival. And when they fought, they did not stop until nothing was left. She raised her hand and touched a small device on her wrist. A holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room. The image was old, faded, damaged, but the shape was clear. A ship. It was massive, angular, dark. It had no markings, no colors, no insignia. It was just black metal and cold light. It looked like nothing the Kirathai had ever built. It looked like nothing anyone had ever built. This is one of their battleships, Myra said. The legends say they had thousands. They say the humans built them in secret, hidden in places no one thought to look. They say the ships could appear from nowhere, strike without warning, and vanish before anyone could respond. A young male scholar named Kale raised his hand. He was bold, confident. His scales were deep green, the color of youth and pride. Elder, he said, these are just stories. There is no proof any of this ever happened. We have searched every record, every archive, every ruin. There is no evidence of this human species. They are a myth, a legend told to frighten children. The other scholars nodded. They agreed with Kale. He was smart. He was practical. He did not believe in fairy tales. Myra looked at him. Her old eyes, cloudy and dim, seemed to see something the others could not. You believe that, she said quietly, because you have never seen what I have seen. The room grew still. The young scholars exchanged glances. Some looked confused. Some looked curious. Kale looked annoyed. Myra did not explain. She simply stood there, her silver scales glowing in the lamp light, her eyes lost in a memory that was 70 years old. She remembered being young. She remembered being bright and eager, just like the scholars before her. She remembered being chosen for a scientific expedition to the edge of known space. A journey to map the empty regions, to see what was there, to bring back knowledge. They found something. It was a wreck. A ship, broken and old, floating in the darkness between stars. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Black metal, cold light, no markings, no insignia. Nothing except a single symbol carved into the hull. A symbol that looked like a planet, blue and green, surrounded by stars. The expedition leader had ordered them to leave. He had told them to forget what they had seen. He had warned them to never speak of it. The Kirathai Dominion was not ready to know the truth. The truth would only bring fear. So Myra kept silent. For 70 years, she kept silent. She watched her people grow proud. She watched them believe they were the pinnacle of civilization. She watched them tell their children stories about a mythical species that never existed. And all the while, she remembered the wreck, the black metal, the cold light, the symbol of a blue and green planet. She knew the legends were not legends. They were warnings. The humans had been here before. They had fought. They had won. And then they had vanished, leaving only stories behind. But they had not died. They had not disappeared. They had simply gone to the darkness between stars. And they were waiting. Myra looked at the young scholars. She saw their disbelief. She saw their pride. She saw the same arrogance that had nearly destroyed her people 10,000 years ago. She did not try to convince them. She simply finished her story. The legends say the humans will return one day, she said. Not to conquer, not to destroy. To remind us that we are not the greatest. We are not the strongest. We are only here because they allowed it. She turned and walked away, leaving the young scholars in silence. They did not believe her. They thought she was old and confused. But somewhere, in the darkness between stars, something was moving. Something had been waiting for 10,000 years. Something was no longer waiting. The Deep Space Observatory sat on a small moon at the edge of the Kirathi Dominion. It was a lonely place. The stars were cold and distant. The silence was endless. Sarah had been there for 3 years. She listened to the darkness every day. She waited for something to happen. Nothing ever did. Until that night. Sarah was sitting at her station, watching the readings scroll across her screen. The numbers were flat. The signals were quiet. It was the same as every other night. She was about to get up and make tea when the alarm screamed. The sound was loud and sharp. It cut through the quiet like a blade. Sarah jumped from her chair and ran to her instruments. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking. She had never heard the alarm before. She did not know what it meant. Then she saw the readings. Her screen was filled with light. A signal was coming from the edge of the galaxy. From a region of space that had been empty for thousands of years. A region that, according to every record, every map, every archive, contained nothing at all. But the signal was there. Clear. Strong. Deliberate. It was not noise. It was not static. It was a pattern. Sarah sat down. Her legs felt weak. She began to analyze the data. Her fingers moved quickly over the controls. The pattern became clearer. It was mathematical. Precise. Ordered. It was a message. She translated it slowly. The words appeared on her screen one by one. Her hands shook so much she had to stop and breathe. When the message was complete, she stared at it for a long time. 3 words. We are coming. Sarah read the words again. And again. Her mind raced. Who sent this? Who could send a signal from empty space? Who had been hiding there, silent, for who knew how long? Then she remembered. Her grandmother used to tell her stories. Old stories. Legends. Tales of a species that had lived before the Kirathi. A species that had fought a great war and then vanished. A species that was so terrible, so powerful, that parents used its name to frighten their children into behaving. The humans. Sarah shook her head. Those were just stories. Fairy tales. They were not real. But the signal was real. And it was getting stronger. Within hours, more signals appeared. Not 1. Not 2. Hundreds. Thousands. All coming from the same empty region of space. All carrying the same message. We are coming. We are coming. We are coming. Sarah recorded everything. She packed the data into a report and sent it to the Dominion Council. She waited for a response. When it came, it was not what she expected. The council told her the equipment must be malfunctioning. They told her to run diagnostics. They told her to go home and rest. They did not believe her. They did not want to believe her. Sarah did not go home. She stayed at her station. She watched the signals grow stronger. She watched them multiply. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the council was wrong. Something was out there. Something had been waiting. Something was no longer waiting. The next day, the first ships appeared. Sarah saw them on her long-range scanners. They emerged from the darkness at the edge of the galaxy. Massive. Angular. Dark. They had no markings. No colors. No insignia. They were just black metal and cold light. More ships came. Then more. Then more. Within hours, the scanners showed thousands of them. A fleet larger than any the Kirathi had ever imagined. A fleet that had come from nowhere. A fleet that was moving toward the Dominion. Sarah sent another report. This time, the council listened. Emergency alarms sounded across the capital world. The military scrambled to mobilize the fleet. Intelligence officers searched every archive, every database, every record for any information about what they were facing. They found nothing. Because the Kirathi had erased the humans from their history long ago. They had burned the records. They had buried the truth. They had told themselves the legends were just stories. They had wanted to forget. Now the legends were here. And they were not asking for permission. Sarah watched the black ships move closer. She thought about her grandmother's stories. She thought about the old tales of war and destruction. She thought about the warnings that no one had believed. She understood now. The humans were not a myth. They were not a legend. They were real. And they had returned. She sat alone in her observatory, watching the darkness fill with ships, and wondered if anyone would survive to tell the story this time. Admiral Vorath had commanded the Kirathai Dominion fleet for 40 years. He had fought in 17 battles. He had never lost one. His name was spoken with respect across the empire. His enemies feared him. His soldiers trusted him. He was the best the Kirathai had to offer. Now he stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the human ships approach, and he felt something he had never felt before. Fear. The human fleet moved slowly. Deliberately. There was no hurry in their advance. No urgency. They moved like beings who had all the time in the world. Like beings who knew that nothing could stop them. They did not communicate. They did not threaten. They did not respond to any hails. They simply moved forward, silent and dark, like a wall of black metal pushing through the stars. Vorath looked at his screens. He had 500 warships behind him, the most advanced weapons in the Dominion, the best soldiers in the fleet. He had everything. He turned to his weapons officer. "Fire," he said. The order was given. 500 ships unleashed their weapons at once. Beams of energy cut through the darkness. Waves of plasma rolled toward the human fleet. Missiles that could crack planets screamed through the void. The weapons hit. Vorath watched the screens. He expected to see explosions. He expected to see the human ships breaking apart. He expected to see fire and death and victory. He saw nothing. The weapons hit. The human ships did not stop. They did not slow. They did not even seem to notice. The beams of energy scattered against their hulls like water against stone. The plasma waves washed over them and faded. The missiles struck and vanished. Vorath stared. His mouth was open. His hands were gripping the edge of his console so hard that his knuckles had turned white. "Again," he said. His voice was hoarse. The fleet fired again. Another volley. Then another. Then another. Beams. Plasma. Missiles. Everything they had. Everything they could throw at the enemy. Nothing changed. The human ships kept moving forward. Silent. Dark. Unstoppable. They did not slow. They did not swerve. They did not even change their formation. They moved like the weapons did not exist. Like the Kirathai fleet did not exist. Vorath looked at his officers. They were staring at the screens. Their faces were pale. Their eyes were wide. They had never seen anything like this. No one had. Then the humans fired back. It was not a volley. It was not a barrage. It was a single shot from a single ship. A beam of light, bright and pure, that cut through the Kirathai fleet like a knife through paper. Vorath watched as 5 of his ships disappeared. Not damaged. Not disabled. Gone. The beam touched them, and they were gone. Vaporized. Erased. There was nothing left. No debris. No fire. No survivors. Just empty space where 5 warships had been a moment before. The bridge was silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Vorath stared at the empty space where his ships used to be. His hands were shaking. His voice was gone. The human ships continued their advance. They did not fire again. They did not need to. They had made their point. They had shown the Kirathai what they could do. They had shown them that resistance was useless. The human fleet stopped. They sat in silence, waiting. A message appeared on every screen in the Kirathai fleet. "We did not come to fight. We came to remind you. You forgot us. You erased us from your history. You told your children we were stories. We are not stories. We are the reason your ancestors hid in caves. We are the reason they built walls. We are the reason they feared the dark." The message ended. The human ships remained still, waiting. Vorath looked at his officers. No one spoke. No one moved. The great Kirathai fleet, the most powerful in the Dominion, sat dead in space. Not because the humans had disabled them. Because there was nothing left to do. They had thrown everything they had at the enemy. The enemy had not even slowed down. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Kirathai Dominion was afraid. Not afraid of losing a battle. Not afraid of losing territory. Afraid of something they did not understand. Afraid of something they could not fight. Afraid of something that had been waiting for them in the darkness, patient and silent, for 10,000 years. Vorath looked at the human ships. He looked at the black metal and the cold light. He looked at the fleet that had come from nowhere and could not be stopped. He did not know what to do. He had never lost a battle. He did not know how to lose. But he was losing now. And he knew, deep in his heart, that the humans were not here to destroy them. They were here to teach them something. And the lesson had already begun. The Dominion Council chamber was the most important room on the Kirathai home world. Its walls were lined with the symbols of power. Its ceilings were high and grand. It was a room built for leaders, for those who ruled, for those who had never known defeat. Now it was filled with fear. The council sat in their high seats, their scales pale, their hands shaking. They had seen the human fleet. They had watched their weapons do nothing. They had watched 5 of their ships disappear in a single moment. They had received the message. And they did not know what to do. Someone mentioned Eldamira, the old woman who told the old stories. The one who had been saying for years that the legends were real. No one had listened to her then. Now they had no choice. They sent for her. Eldamira was brought before the council. She was ancient now. Her scales had faded to pale silver. Her body was thin and frail. She walked with a cane, her steps slow and careful. Her eyes were clouded with age. But when she stood before the council, she stood tall. The High Counselor spoke first. His voice was sharp, demanding, "You know something about these ships, about these beings. Tell us. Who are they? Why have they come? What do they want?" Myra looked at him. She looked at all of them. The proud leaders of the Kirathai Dominion, sitting in their high seats, waiting for answers. They looked so small to her now. So young. So afraid. "You want to know why they have come," she said. Her voice was weak, but it carried across the chamber. "You want to know what they want. The answer is simple. They want you to remember." The council exchanged glances. Remember what? What was there to remember? Myra began to speak. She told them the truth she had kept hidden for 70 years. The truth that had been buried for 10,000 years. Long before the Dominion, she said, before the great cities, before we even knew the stars, the Kirathai ruled this sector. We were powerful. We were advanced. We believed we were the greatest species in the galaxy. She paused. But we were not alone. There was another species. A younger species. They were called humans. We saw them as primitive. Weak. Beneath us. We did not respect them. We did not fear them. We tried to destroy them. The council sat in silence. Some looked confused. Some looked angry. How dare she say such things? The Kirathai had always been the dominant species. That was history. That was fact. Myra continued. The war lasted 1,000 years. We threw everything we had at the humans. Our best ships. Our best weapons. Our best soldiers. And the humans did what they have always done. They adapted. They evolved. They became something we could not defeat. Her voice grew stronger. In the end, we did not win. We survived. Because the humans let us survive. They gave us a choice. Forget. Erase the war from history. Pretend it never happened. And live. She looked at the council. We chose to forget. We burned the records. We buried the truth. We rewrote our history. We told ourselves we had always been the dominant species. We told our children stories about a mythical species that never existed. We called them legends. We called them fairy tales. We called them anything except what they were. She paused. The truth. The chamber was silent. The council members stared at her. Some were shaking their heads. Some had tears in their eyes. They did not want to believe her. But deep down, they knew. They had always known. The stories were too old. Too consistent. Too detailed. They were not fairy tales. They were memories. The humans did not die, Myra said. They did not disappear. They went to the darkness between stars. And they waited. For 10,000 years, they waited. They watched us grow proud again. They watched us forget the lesson we had been taught. And now they have returned. The High Counselor leaned forward. His voice was barely a whisper. What do they want? Do they want our worlds? Our resources? Our submission? Myra shook her head slowly. No, they do not want our worlds. They do not want our resources. They do not want our submission. They want us to remember what happened. They want us to know that we are not the greatest. We are not the strongest. We are survivors of their mercy. And if we forget again, they will not show mercy a second time. She looked at each council member, one by one. You asked me who they are. They are the ones who beat us. You asked me why they have returned. They returned because we forgot. You asked me what they want. They want us to remember. And they will not leave until we do. The council sat in stunned silence. The truth settled over them like a weight. They were not the masters of the galaxy. They were not the pinnacle of civilization. They were the remnants of a species that had been beaten, broken, and allowed to live. And the ones who had beaten them were waiting at their doorstep. The High Counselor lowered his head. "What do we do now?" he asked. Myra looked at him with her clouded eyes. "We remember," she said. "And we never forget again." The human fleet did not move for 3 days. They sat at the edge of Kirathai space, silent and dark, their black metal hulls reflecting no light. They did not communicate. They did not threaten. They simply waited. The Kirathai spent those 3 days in chaos. The council debated late into every night. The military prepared for a final stand that everyone knew would fail. The people panicked in the streets, remembering the old stories, the old warnings, the old fear. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. There was nothing they could do. The humans had already shown them that. On the 3rd day, a message arrived. It came to every screen, every communicator, every device across the Dominion. It was not a threat. It was not a demand. It was simply a statement. You remember now. Do not forget again. And then the human ships began to leave. One by one, they turned away from Kirathai space. One by one, they moved back toward the edge of the galaxy. They did not fire. They did not loot. They did not take anything. They simply went, silent and dark, the way they had come. Admiral Vorath stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the last human ship disappear into the darkness. His hands were no longer shaking. His fear was gone. Something else had taken its place. Something heavier. Understanding. He understood now. The humans could have taken everything. They could have destroyed the Kirathai. They could have conquered the Dominion. They had the power. They had the means. They had the reason. But they chose not to. Not because they were weak. Because they wanted the Kirathai to live with the truth. To carry it. To remember it. To never forget it again. That night, Elder Myra passed away. She was found in her small room, lying on her bed, her silver scales soft in the dim light. Her eyes were closed. Her hands were folded. She looked peaceful. A young scholar named Sarah sat beside her. Sarah had been the one who first detected the human signal. She had been the one who tried to warn the council. She had been the one who no one believed. Now she was the one who held the old woman's hand as she slipped away. Myra's eyes opened one last time. She looked at Sarah. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They were never the monsters," she said. "We were. They were just the ones who survived." She paused to breathe. Her chest rose and fell slowly. "Tell the others," she said. "Tell them to remember. Tell them to never forget." Her eyes closed. Her hand went still. Elder Myra was gone. Sarah sat with her for a long time. She did not cry. She understood now. The humans did not come to punish the Kirathai. They came to save them. From their own arrogance. From their own pride. From the darkness that had been growing in their hearts for 10,000 years. In the months that followed, the Kirathai changed. It was slow at first, then faster. The council ordered the old records reopened. Historians went to work, digging through ruins, translating ancient texts, uncovering the truth that had been buried for so long. They rewrote the history books. They put the truth back into the records. They told their children the real story. Not the legend. Not the myth. The truth. They were not the greatest species in the galaxy. They were not the strongest. They were not the pinnacle of civilization. They were the ones who had been shown mercy. And they would never forget it again. The human ships vanished into the darkness, returning to the place where they had waited for 10,000 years. But they left something behind. A monument, floating at the edge of Kirathai space. It was made of black metal, the same black metal as their ships. A single symbol was carved into its surface. A planet, blue and green, surrounded by stars. Beneath the symbol, words were carved in the old Kirathai language. Words that would stand for eternity. "We were here before you. We will be here after you. Remember us, not as monsters, not as saviors, as those who chose to let you live. Do not make us choose differently." Sarah visited the monument often. She would sit in her small ship, floating beside the black metal, reading the words again and again. She thought about Elder Myra. She thought about the humans. She thought about the truth that had been hidden for so long. She understood now what the humans wanted. They did not want to be worshipped. They did not want to be feared. They wanted the galaxy to remember. To remember that power without wisdom was destruction. To remember that arrogance led to ruin. To remember that mercy was the greatest strength of all. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, the human fleet drifted. Silent, patient, watching. They did not want to be remembered as gods or demons. They wanted to be remembered as survivors, as the ones who had been wronged and had chosen to forgive, as the ones who had the power to destroy and had chosen to teach instead. They were not legends. They were not myths. They were the ones who survived. And if anyone ever forgot that, they would return. Not to conquer, to remind. Sarah looked at the monument one last time. She touched the cold black metal. She whispered the words she would carry for the rest of her life. "We remember," she said. "We will never forget again." The end.